The Zortax Empire arrived with a thunderous roar, their ships tearing through the fabric of space itself. As they descended upon Earth, their massive warships blotting out the sky. Like an endless storm, the alien fleet came in waves, each one more terrifying than the last. Humanity had never seen anything like it. The first attack was swift and brutal. They did not ask for surrender. They did not offer terms. They came to conquer, and they came with overwhelming force. The first wave of their fleet arrived over major cities across the globe, and within minutes massive energy blasts reduced entire metropolises to rubble. Entire continents were shaken as if the earth itself trembled in fear. The world's military was quick to respond, but it was futile. Their weapons were not enough to match the power of the Zortax. No defense system on Earth was advanced enough to stand against the might of this invading force. The alien vessels were far too large, their weapons far too powerful. Humanity's best fighter jets were torn apart like paper in the face of alien firepower. The armored vehicles that rolled out to defend the cities were useless against the Zortax energy cannons. The air was filled with the smell of burning wreckage and the cries of civilians as their cities fell to dust. The Zortax ships deployed their ground forces without mercy, their soldiers brutal and relentless, cutting down anything that dared to stand in their way. Humanity fought back with all they had, but their efforts were no match for the sheer technological superiority of the invaders. For days, the Zortax rampaged across the globe. Humanity's leaders scrambled to find a solution, but the truth was clear. There was no hope. Earth was not prepared for this kind of invasion. The governments of the world convened in emergency meetings, but their plans were crumbling as the skies filled with alien ships and the ground became a battlefield. The people of Earth watched helplessly as their world burned. Their brightest minds tried to come up with a strategy, but it was all futile. Humanity's greatest hope seemed to be fading away as they realized their weapons and technology were nothing compared to what the Zortax had brought to bear. But amid the chaos, a secret was stirring in the shadows. Deep within the classified files of Earth's military, a relic from a forgotten era lay dormant, a whisper of something that had been hidden away for centuries, a weapon of unimaginable power that humanity had developed in the darkest days of their history. Long before the world had known peace, a few select individuals had known of it and had kept it hidden from the world for fear that it would fall into the wrong hands. Now, as the Earth teetered on the brink of extinction, a small group of scientists and military leaders had begun to dig into the past. They discovered the truth about the secret fleet built long ago, a fleet that could take on the might of the galaxy and beyond. It was called the ultimate Armada, and it was buried deep within Earth's forgotten history, waiting for the day it would be needed again. Humanity had one last chance, but would they be able to awaken it in time? Or would the Zortax be the ones to decide their fate once and for all? As the days wore on, the Zortax Empire tightened its grip on Earth, their invasion becoming more methodical and cruel. Entire cities were wiped from existence, leaving nothing but smoldering ruins. The invaders showed no mercy, their weapons cutting through everything with terrifying ease. As the world's governments scrambled for answers, the human race found itself teetering on the brink of extinction. Desperation hung in the air, and for the first time in centuries, the entire planet seemed to be united in one thought: there was no hope. But amidst the chaos, a flicker of something ancient began to stir in the shadows. Not all was lost, not all had been forgotten. In secret locations scattered across the world, whispers of an old legend began to circulate. It was a story told in hushed tones by those who knew the truth of Earth's hidden history, a tale of a fleet that had been built long before the Zortax ever set their sights on the planet, a fleet so powerful that it could turn the tide of any battle, no matter how hopeless the situation might seem. The tale spoke of the ultimate Armada, humanity's greatest weapon hidden away in deep space. For centuries only to be called upon in humanity's darkest hour, it was nothing more than myth to most people, but to a select few, it was the key to saving the world. Deep within the remains of Earth's most secretive military base, a group of scientists and military leaders began to dig into the archives, hoping to uncover any truth to the old stories they had heard so many times before. At first, they thought it was nothing more than another tale of hope born from desperation. But as they sifted through classified documents and decrypted ancient files, their eyes widened with disbelief. The Armada was real. It had been built by Earth's greatest minds long ago, and it was waiting hidden from the rest of the galaxy in a distant part of space where no one could find it. The group of scientists and military officials wasted no time in taking action. They knew that the Zortax would not wait for them to be ready. Every second that passed brought the planet closer to annihilation. They began to activate a long-dormant network of communication that would reach out to the Armada deep in the cold void of space. The process was slow and uncertain, but they had no choice. It was their only hope. As the transmission went out into the vast unknown, the people of Earth continued to fight back in any way they could, but every attempt was met with failure. The Zortax warships tore through any resistance without even breaking a sweat. As Earth's defense forces struggled to hold ground, the only thing keeping the world from total collapse was the fleeting hope that the Armada would respond, but time was running out and the pressure was mounting. Meanwhile, in the depths of space, the dormant fleet lay silent, and still, its hulls untouched by the wear of time, its systems powered down, waiting for the moment it would once again rise to defend the world that had built it. Those who had crafted it believed it would never be needed, yet here it was, Earth's final defense lying in wait. But would it be enough? Would humanity be able to awaken it in time to save the planet? Or would the Zortax be the ones to have the last word in this war for survival? The transmission that had been sent out into the void of space was not immediate in its response. The scientists and military leaders who had initiated the signal waited in anxious silence, their hopes pinned on something so ancient it felt like a dream. The uncertainty of whether the Armada would even hear them was unbearable. Yet as the hours stretched into days, the first sign of a response came in the form of a soft flicker on their screens. It was faint, but unmistakable, an acknowledgement. The Armada had received the message and was beginning to awaken. With a surge of adrenaline, the team quickly mobilized. They had no time to waste. The Zortax forces were drawing nearer, and their grip on the planet was tightening. But now there was a glimmer of hope. They rushed to their stations, scrambling to access the systems that would bring the Armada to full alert. It was a race against time, one that felt as though it would be lost in the blink of an eye. As they worked tirelessly, they could feel the weight of their task bearing down on them. They were not just activating a fleet, they were activating the last hope of humanity. Deep within the Armada's core, its artificial intelligence slowly began to stir, its systems coming online one by one. The dormant ships, once hidden in the deepest corners of space, began to hum with power, their engines igniting for the first time in centuries. The machines of war that had once been forgotten came to life in unison. The Armada was no longer a myth, it was real, and it was ready to fight. Across Earth's secret military base, alarms blared as the systems began to activate. Every engineer and soldier present watched with awe and disbelief as the digital maps of the Armada filled in with the locations of the ships, each one a perfect replica of Earth's greatest technological achievements. The ships were massive beyond comprehension, their design sleek and terrifyingly beautiful, their weaponry far beyond anything Earth had ever conceived. The Armada was a force that would make the Zortax tremble if they could only be unleashed in time. Outside the base, Earth's surface continued to burn. The skies were filled with alien ships and the sounds of destruction as the Zortax made their ruthless assault. But in the shadows, something was stirring. The Armada was no longer just a hope, it was becoming reality. And soon it would be time for humanity to show the galaxy what they were capable of. The first of the Armada's ships began to break through the atmosphere like a force of nature. They tore through space with incredible speed, their cloaking technology preventing the Zortax from detecting them. Until it was too late, the human fleet had arrived, and they were ready to fight with all the power they had at their disposal. The invasion had just met its match. The crew members aboard the ships were descendants of Earth's original engineers and military tacticians. They had trained for this moment their entire lives. They had been prepared for the day the Armada would be activated, and now the time had come. The battle for Earth would begin anew. As the Armada emerged from the darkness of space and into the orbital battlefield above Earth's atmosphere, the first attack came like a shockwave, an explosion of energy that sent shockwaves through the Zortax fleet. The invaders were unprepared, their massive warships crumpling under the force of humanity's retaliation. The tide of battle had begun to shift, and for the first time in days, the Zortax realized they were facing something far more powerful than they had ever imagined. The true might of Earth had been unleashed. The Zortax fleet reeled from the sudden attack, their once imposing warships now helpless in the face of Earth's advanced weaponry. Humanity's Armada was an unstoppable force. Their ships darted through space. With terrifying speed, their weapons unleashing devastating blasts that ripped through Zortax vessels. Like paper, the invaders had no time to react. Their shields shattered under the weight of the human assault, and their once dominant fleet began to crumble. The first wave of the Armada had caught them completely off guard. The Zortax commanders scrambled to organize a counterattack, but it was already too late. The human ships moved in perfect synchronization, their tactics precise and ruthless. The Zortax had relied on their superior technology and overwhelming numbers, but they had underestimated the cunning and resilience of humanity. Each ship in the Armada had been designed for maximum efficiency and devastation. Earth's finest minds had crafted them with the singular purpose of defending the planet, and now they were being put to the test. The human fleet struck with unmatched precision, their energy cannons vaporizing entire sections of Zortax warships in a single shot, while smaller fighters swarmed like deadly insects, tearing through the alien defenses with ease. As the battle raged above Earth, the Zortax were forced to reassess their position. For the first time since the beginning of the invasion, they began to realize they were no longer the ones in control. The human Armada had transformed the tide of war into something unrecognizable. They were facing an enemy that had been lying dormant for centuries, but now they were awake, and they fought with a ferocity and intelligence that the Zortax had never encountered. From the command deck of the Zortax flagship Ravager, the Supreme Commander watched in stunned disbelief as his fleet was torn apart. He had never considered the possibility that humans could possess such power. He had believed Earth was nothing more than a backwater planet filled with weaklings. But now he was witnessing their might firsthand. His fleet was being outmaneuvered and outgunned by the very species he had once considered insignificant. His soldiers and officers were scrambling to reorganize, but it was clear they were losing their grip on the situation. The Zortax attempted to regroup, sending in their remaining warships for a coordinated counterattack, but the human fleet had already anticipated their every move. They knew the Zortax would try to surround them, and so they adapted quickly. The Armada's ships broke formation into smaller squads that moved independently, striking the Zortax fleet from all directions. The human fleet seemed to be everywhere at once, a blur of destruction and speed, their advanced AI systems predicting every move the Zortax made with frightening accuracy. The Zortax flagship Ravager fired its devastating weapons at the advancing human ships, but the humans were prepared. Their shields deflected the blasts with ease and retaliated with a barrage of missiles that crippled the Zortax ship's defenses. The Ravager shuddered as it took direct hits from the human weapons, its once proud hull creaking under the strain. The Zortax commander knew his fleet was falling apart, and his only option was to call for reinforcements, but deep down he knew it was too late. As the battle in space continued, the Zortax began to retreat, pulling back their forces and trying to regroup, but the human Armada showed no signs of stopping. They pushed forward with relentless precision, every moment of the battle a testament to the strength and ingenuity of humanity. The Zortax had underestimated them, and now they were paying the price. Earth's ultimate weapon had come to life, and it was showing the galaxy just how dangerous humanity could be. The Zortax were reeling from the devastation. Their fleet had been shattered in a way they never imagined possible. The human Armada pressed forward without hesitation, showing no mercy to the alien invaders who had once seemed so unstoppable. Their warships continued to slice through the Zortax ranks with ease. Humanity's advanced technology outclassed the invaders at every turn, and for the first time since the invasion had begun, the Zortax commanders began to panic. Their once formidable strength was now crumbling before them. Their ships were no match for the human weapons that tore through their ranks with relentless precision. On the bridge of the Ravager, the Zortax Supreme Commander was losing control. His once confident demeanor shattered. He had expected Earth to fall quickly to his might, but now he watched in disbelief as the human Armada decimated his fleet. Ship after ship vanished into the void of space. His officers were in disarray, scrambling to come up with a plan to stop the human advance. But the truth was undeniable. They were losing, and they were losing badly. The Zortax had never been forced to retreat until now. They had always conquered their enemies with ease, but humanity had proven to be a different kind of adversary. In desperation, the Zortax commander ordered his remaining fleet to form a defensive line, hoping to buy time to regroup and call in reinforcements from the heart of the Zortax Empire. But the human ships did not relent. They pressed forward with calculated brutality, each strike more devastating than the last. The Zortax defense crumbled under the relentless assault. Their shields shattered, their weapons useless against the power of the Armada. The human fleet tore through them like a storm, leaving only debris in its wake. As the Zortax fleet began to disintegrate, the human ships turned their attention to the Zortax flagship Ravager. The ship that had once been the symbol of the invaders might now stood as a dying relic of their arrogance. The Ravager fired its weapons in a final desperate attempt to break the human advance, but the blasts bounced off the human ship's reinforced shields. The human fleet swarmed the alien ship as if it were nothing more than a predator closing in on its prey. The Zortax commander was cornered. He knew his fleet was lost, and his only hope was to retreat. But even that option was slipping away as the human ships encircled the Ravager. The alien fleet had been all but wiped out, and the remaining Zortax forces were scattered in disarray. The commander's final orders were clear: retreat at all costs. But the human armada was relentless. It would not allow the Zortax to escape their judgment. One by one, the remaining Zortax ships were eliminated, the human fleet targeting the weakest points in their defenses with ruthless efficiency. The Ravager was now the last hope of the Zortax Empire, and even it was on the brink of destruction. Its hull breached in multiple places, its weapons disabled, its systems failing under the constant pressure of the human assault. The commander watched in horror as his once proud flagship was torn apart. The Ravager was dying, and with it the Zortax hopes of conquering Earth. The human fleet had proven that they were not to be underestimated, that they could rise up when faced with the impossible, and now the invaders knew that they were no longer in control of this war. They were being hunted. As the Ravager was engulfed in explosions and flames, the remaining Zortax forces began their retreat into deep space. Scattered and leaderless, they fled from the battlefield, knowing they had been bested by an enemy they had once deemed unworthy of notice. Humanity had won, but the price of this victory was yet to be realized. The Zortax were beaten, but the battle for Earth was far from over. The Zortax retreat was nothing short of chaotic, their once proud fleet shattered and scattered across the vastness of space, the remains of their warships drifting aimlessly as the human armada continued its pursuit. The Zortax were broken, but they were not defeated, and the Zortax Supreme Command knew it would not be long before they regrouped and attempted a final push to reclaim control of Earth. Humanity had won a significant victory, but the invaders had a secret weapon that could shift the balance of power back in their favor. The Zortax had not come to Earth unprepared. They had something far worse than anything the humans had yet faced, buried deep within their war machines, a weapon of unimaginable destruction. As the human fleet stood victorious in the aftermath of the battle over Earth's orbit, their commanders knew the war was far from over. The Zortax might have retreated, but their empire was vast, and they had already demonstrated their ruthlessness and cunning. The humans had won a battle, but not yet the war, and with every passing minute the Zortax were preparing to strike back. On the surface of Earth, the people celebrated their victory, their spirits lifted by the sight of the Zortax retreating back into space. But the leaders of the Armada remained cautious. They knew better than to let their guard down for a moment. The Zortax had been humiliated, but that did not mean they would simply surrender. Their conquest of Earth was far from finished, and there was no telling what kind of retaliation they might unleash. Deep within the Zortax command ship Ravager, the Supreme Commander convened a war council with his most trusted generals and strategists. His eyes burned with fury as he assessed the situation. The loss of his fleet was catastrophic, but he had not given up hope. His mind was already turning to the next phase of the invasion. And he had a weapon that would make the human victory seem like a mere distraction, a weapon so powerful it could annihilate the entire planet in one fell swoop. The Zortax Supreme Commander activated a series of encrypted communications, sending out a message to the farthest reaches of his empire, summoning the ultimate weapon of their arsenal, a planet-destroying superweapon that had been designed long ago for use in their most desperate hour. The weapon was a massive construction housed within the depths of a nearby moon. Its power was so vast that it could obliterate entire continents in seconds, and now it was ready to be unleashed. On Earth, the Armada's leadership was unaware of the Zortax's hidden weapon, as they focused on repairing their ships and regrouping. The scientists who had discovered the Armada's existence were still working tirelessly to understand the full capabilities of the ancient fleet. They had uncovered. Their minds were still reeling from the shock of humanity's triumph, but they had no time to rest. They knew the Zortax would not give up. And now they were faced with the reality that the invaders were preparing for something much worse. Days passed, and the tension in Earth's military base grew thicker with each passing moment. Reports began to trickle in about unusual activity on the edge of the solar system, strange signals emanating from the Zortax fleet. But no one could pinpoint the source. Something was wrong, but no one could figure out what. Then, without warning, the silence was shattered as a massive pulse of energy emanated from the depths of space. The human fleet detected it immediately, and the truth became clear. The Zortax were not retreating at all. They had simply been luring humanity into a trap that would soon make Earth's victory seem like a distant memory. The superweapon was coming, and it would not be stopped. The human fleet was in a state of alarm as the pulse of energy reverberated through space. It was unlike anything they had ever encountered before, a force so powerful it rattled their ships and systems. The warning lights flashed red across every command station as the technicians scrambled to analyze the incoming signal. They had detected something massive in the distance, and it was moving fast. The fleet commanders exchanged worried glances. Their worst fears had just been confirmed. The Zortax had not given up. They were preparing their ultimate weapon, and the human victory was about to be turned into a deadly game of survival. Back on Earth, the news spread like wildfire. Panic swept across every city as the people realized what was happening. The celebrations of victory faded into fear and uncertainty. The leaders of the world scrambled to coordinate defenses, but it was clear that no earthly technology could prepare them for what was coming. The Zortax superweapon was beyond anything they had ever imagined, and it was on its way to destroy everything humanity had fought for. As the human fleet mobilized for a counterattack, they could only guess at the scale of the weapon they were facing. Reports from deep space reconnaissance teams painted a chilling picture. Something had been hidden in the far reaches of the solar system, a weapon so large it could dwarf anything the Zortax had shown so far, and its energy output was growing exponentially with each passing moment. It was coming, and there was nothing the Armada could do to stop it, not yet at least. In the depths of space, the Zortax had been preparing for this moment for years. The weapon was designed to be the final blow to any resistance, a weapon that could wipe out entire planets with a single shot. Its construction had taken decades, and now it was ready to unleash its wrath on Earth. The Zortax Supreme Commander knew that the weapon would ensure victory no matter what humanity threw at them. It was a gamble, but one they were prepared to make if they could destroy Earth's last hope, the Armada, and everything that stood in their way would be eradicated once and for all. The weapon, housed on a moon-like satellite at the farthest reaches of the solar system, was beginning to charge its core. The massive structure hummed with power as it drew energy from nearby asteroids and planetary debris. The force that was being gathered could obliterate the human fleet in one swift strike. But it would not stop there. The weapon was designed to ensure the complete destruction of Earth's surface in one cataclysmic burst of energy. The human fleet, now in full combat readiness, was racing toward the unknown source of the signal. The Armada's commanders were rallying their forces, preparing to make one last stand. But even as they prepared to fight, they knew the odds were against them. The Zortax were ruthless and relentless, and this weapon was beyond anything they had ever faced. The weapon was a final act of desperation, one that could decide the fate of humanity. The tension was unbearable as the human fleet closed in on the weapon's location. The skies above Earth were filled with dread and anticipation. Every ship in the Armada was prepared to give everything in the coming battle, but the Zortax weapon was already nearly fully charged, and its power grew by the second. With each heartbeat, the human fleet could feel the weight of the coming storm bearing down upon them. Then the weapon fired a brilliant beam of energy, shot across space, like a lightning bolt slicing through the darkness, and heading straight for Earth. The force of the blast was so intense that it rippled through space itself, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. The human fleet had only moments to respond as the beam grew closer and closer. The human fleet watched in horror as the beam of energy hurtled toward Earth, its intensity growing with every passing second. The sheer force of the blast was enough to bend space itself, and the Armada knew there was no time left for hesitation. The commanders barked orders, and the fleet sprang into action. But the Zortax weapon was too powerful. The first wave of human fighters scrambled to intercept, but they were swatted away like insects. Their shields buckled under the intensity of the blast, and their weapons were too weak to even scratch the surface of the Zortax superweapon. The beam's trajectory was locked in, and it was clear that it would hit Earth in mere moments. But then something unexpected happened as the beam drew closer. Something deep within the Armada's central command network began to hum with power. The fleet's AI systems suddenly came alive with a plan, one that had been buried deep in the Armada's protocols since its inception. It was a weapon of last resort, something the ancient human engineers had left behind when they first created the Armada, a secret weapon hidden within the depths of the fleet's flagship. The AI had begun to reroute power to the fleet's central core, harnessing energy from every remaining ship in the fleet and focusing it into one singular concentrated burst of firepower. The humans had no choice but to trust their instincts. They could only hope that the weapon would work, that their last-ditch effort would be enough to stop the incoming blast and protect Earth from certain destruction. The central command of the flagship Aegis activated its core engines as the fleet converged around it. The entire Armada pushed forward in a desperate attempt to intercept the beam that would obliterate their home. They could feel the pressure mounting with each passing second. The weapon was ready, and it was their last chance. The energy that was building within the Armada's core reached critical levels, and then with a deafening roar, a brilliant light erupted from the flagship Aegis. It was a beam of raw, concentrated power, one that stretched out into the vastness of space and collided with the Zortax weapon's beam in an explosion of light and force. The collision sent shockwaves rippling through the fabric of space itself. The human fleet and the Zortax weapon engaged in a cataclysmic battle of energy beams as the two forces pushed against each other with all the might they could muster. For a moment, the universe seemed to hold its breath as the two beams clashed, the Zortax weapon's blast and the human counterattack struggling for dominance. And then the tide shifted. The human beam began to push back the Zortax's attack. Its intensity increased as the energy from the fleet's core surged through the Aegis and its sister ships. The Zortax weapon faltered under the force, and within moments the human beam broke through the alien blast, sending it spiraling off into the void of space with a violent explosion that shattered the weapon's core. The Zortax superweapon had been destroyed. The threat that had loomed over Earth for so long was gone in an instant. The shockwave from the explosion rippled across the battlefield as the Zortax fleet scrambled to retreat. Their weapon had failed, and their remaining forces were left vulnerable without their ultimate weapon. The human fleet took full advantage of the opening. Their fighters surged forward, and their ships unleashed a final barrage of devastating firepower against the remaining Zortax forces. The Zortax fleet was disintegrating. Their once mighty ships, now little more than debris floating in the vacuum of space. The survivors attempted to flee, but they were hunted down relentlessly by the human Armada, which showed no mercy. This time the battle had been won, and humanity had proven itself to be a force the Zortax could not reckon with. Back on Earth, the people watched as the Zortax forces were annihilated in space. The skies began to clear for the first time in days as the threat of total destruction receded into the stars. Humanity had triumphed against all odds, and as the final Zortax warship exploded in a brilliant flash, The world erupted into celebration, but the true cost of the war was only beginning to be realized. The battle had been won, but the war had left its scars, and the price of survival was a heavy one. In the aftermath of the battle, Earth's skies cleared, but the scars of the war were etched into every corner of the planet's cities. Lay in ruins entire landscapes, transformed by the devastation left behind by the Zortax invasion. The people had won, but they had paid a heavy price. The human spirit had been tested in ways no one could have predicted, but they had emerged victorious, and for the first time in generations humanity dared to believe that they had a future again. Across the world, governments and military forces began the difficult task of rebuilding the shattered infrastructure. The Armada had done its part, but now it was up to the people of Earth to rise from the ashes and reclaim what had been lost. While the Zortax fleet had been decimated, the long-term effects of the invasion were felt everywhere. Diseases from the alien attacks spread across the population. Environmental damage was immense, and the economic toll would take decades to heal. But there was a newfound sense of unity among humanity. They had faced extinction and come out the other side stronger. In space, the Armada began its slow return to Earth. The massive ships that had once been humanity's ultimate weapon now stood as symbols of triumph, but they were not immortal. They had sustained damage in the final battle, and many of the ships were heavily scarred. Their systems needed time to be restored, and the fleet would not remain in orbit forever. The decision was made to decommission most of the Armada and return the remaining ships to deep space, where they would be preserved as a last line of defense. Should the need ever arise again, Earth had faced its greatest challenge, and the Armada had done its part. But the people of Earth now understood the true lesson of the war. They were the ones who had to carry the future forward. It was no longer about relying on weapons or fleets. It was about resilience and unity. Leaders from across the world gathered for the first time since the invasion began to discuss Earth's future. They knew that rebuilding would not be easy, and that it would take a generation or more to fully recover, but the sense of hope was palpable in the air. They had faced an enemy that seemed unbeatable, and yet they had triumphed together. This moment of victory would fuel their determination to build a world that was stronger, more united, and more prepared for the challenges of the future. In the quiet corridors of Earth's rebuilt command center, a lone scientist stared at the star maps of the universe, his eyes scanning the vastness of space. As the thought gnawed at him deep down, he knew that the Zortax might not be the only threat Earth would face in the future. The universe was full of dangers that humanity had never imagined. But now they were no longer just a vulnerable species on the edge of the galaxy. They had proven they could fight back. They had proven that they could rise above the impossible, and they would be ready for whatever came next. As the human fleet drifted slowly back toward Earth's orbit, the people of the planet watched in awe. They had survived, they had won, and though they would always remember the darkness of the war, they would also remember the strength that had united them in their darkest hour. The legacy of the Armada would live on, not just in the ships that had saved them, but in the hearts and minds of every person on Earth who had come together to protect their home. No matter the cost, humanity had shown that when the impossible came knocking, they would not back down. They would rise, and they would fight, and in that fight they had won a victory that no one could ever take from them.